Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel and Escape from the City on the ABC. And Ben Kingsley, Chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of the 2018 Property Investment Advisory Firm of the Year.
All right, folks, you're on the Property Couch where each week Ben and I bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management. Hello, Ben.
Hello, mate. How are you?
I'm good, mate. You've had a very busy week, and today we are going to talk about how busy that week has been.
Yes, we are. And it's a big news week.
It's a big news week, and it's so important that...
And we're in the news.
Well, you are. It's so important that I just want to quickly get through some housekeeping items because I really want to pivot hard to what we want to talk about today. So quickly, 40 tips update. Well done to everyone. Still time to join. We'd love to have you part of it. There's some ripping prizes on offer if you want to join us. But the winner this week, Ben, is Daggers.
Daggers.
Got 8
out
of 9, which is a terrific effort. Now, equal first, but not on margin, with 8, was Death and Taxes.
Oh, got to give him a book. Or her a book.
Yes. Good so point. Given that we are liking the names and the creativity, we couldn't go away with not giving that. So just reach out to Ivis at info@thepropertycouch.com.au. Daggers and Death and Taxes.
Yep, choose your book.
Choose your book, and we'll send that to you. Secondly, Ben, the big, I don't watch much of morning television, but I did this morning. I saw the Sunrise program, and boy, did they make a big deal about someone driving down the road. But clearly that was the Honourable Scott Morrison who went to the Governor-General and clearly called the election for the 18th of May.
Correct.
So a fair bit going to go on for there. You were busy this week, planes, trains and automobiles?
Yep.
In Adelaide.
Adelaide, so a lot going on in the media side of work, the stuff we were doing, but Adelaide was great. So great turnout, around 100 people showed up for our first event in Adelaide. So well done to the team who put that together. It was great. We also had special guests in terms of Peter Kalisos, Property Professor, Bushy Martin, also shared his knowledge and wisdom in our Q&A session. So just all round, we did a good data dive into some of the fundamentals. So that's what these are about. You know, it's about networking, talking shop, getting an understanding, asking others how they've gone about it. So if you haven't been to one of our pick and meetups, then you're missing out, right? If you want to talk property, this is the place to talk property.
So Ben, what I'm noticing is you've been to Adelaide, if you're in Melbourne, you've been to Sydney, you've been to Perth. What about poor old Brisbane?
Brisbane, well, good segue, Bryce. Wednesday night, next Wednesday, the 17th, is our launch of our Queensland Picker State. Okay. So that is exciting for us. We already have over 50 people registered. If you want to come along, inside our show notes, there'll be a link to the Eventbrite where you can register. You also go to the Picker Facebook page and confirm your invitation there as well. And we've got a very, very special guest.
Oh, mate, I like the very special guest, as you know, from 227 episodes. Who's the special guest?
It's Cameron Cusher from Core Logic. So he's going to do the data dive. He's going to look at all of the updates of the property market. So you're getting, one of Australia's leading property experts giving us his insights into the marketplace. The event is being held at the Real Estate Institute of Queensland. So that's fantastic. The Real Estate Association of Queensland, I should say. So yeah, get along. I'll be flying up. I'll be hosting the night. Really keen to meet so many more property investors if you're in the southeast Queensland area.
Shout out to Couches and shout out to Friends of Couches.
Yep. Everyone's welcome. You don't have to be a member, but hopefully by the end of the night you will see the value in your $5 or your $20 for 5 years and you can join up on the night.
Very good, I like it. Now, in the future, Ben, we are going to do a negative gearing topic. So the questions that people have around the negative gearing policy, which we're going to talk about today. So Ives is going to put up a little thing on social media and we're going to start to accumulate questions. So let us know what questions you want answered. Let's keep it constructive and we will do that in an upcoming episode.
And because of the big story that's gone on this week, Bryce, we're obviously having to put back. So we did plan to do part 2.
We did plan to do part 2 of Julia Hartman, and we also went out via email this morning to suggest that that's what we were going to do. But in fact, given that this has sort of grown, a fair bit, particularly in the last 24 hours, we are going to put Julia Hartman's second part 2 of the wonderful interview we had, because last week it was actually one of our highest downloaded episodes for some time, so clearly there's an appetite.
We are definitely going to be talking tax though.
We are.
And Julia is not far away.
Yeah.
But because this has probably been the biggest political story of the week that is relevant to all Australians, we've decided to run this special episode.
And I think so too. It's there's a lot of really cool stuff coming up, so stick around, folks, for that. And the last thing before we go into the meat and potatoes of today, Taria's book campaign, Ivis has suggested that you need to go to Facebook. It closes on the 16th of April. We had 4 free copies of her books that she's kindly donated, Ben. All you need to do is really simple, go and listen to her episode, which is amazing, and then just give us your key takeaway, and then we're going to choose someone who, in fact, we're going to choose not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 people, and we're going to give away those books, which is really great.
And that ends in April?
It ends in April. Okay. Tuesday the 16th of April.
Beautiful.
There you go. Now, Ben, today my Mindset Minute theme is very, very simple. I am really enjoying a book called The 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos. It's Jordan Peterson. Have you come across that at all?
No, sorry, I haven't.
It is heavy, man. it is heavy. These 12 rules are like essays all in one. But you can actually get a fair bit out of the book just by reading the titles of the chapter. So chapter 4, or the rule number 4, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. And it's a wonderful, wonderful reminder that, you know, whenever, and I talked about social media last week, we are in this world of comparing someone else's highlights reel to our behind the scenes. If you're going to do that, Ben, that's a path to destruction. But a better, you know, and in my life hack today, I'm going to talk about swap, don't stop.
Oh, okay.
So the swapping for this one is, instead of comparing yourself to someone else, compare yourself to who you were yesterday and just measure your growth in those terms. So it was pretty good, which I particularly like. So I thought that would be a good one. All right. So Ben, we're going to dive into it because last week we gave a little world exclusive, which we might just remind the folks just now on what that looked like last week.
I've got a world exclusive on the podcast today, Bryce.
Cool.
So it's coming in a matter of minutes.
Okay.
Okay. So we're going straight to the Did You Know, right? Because we've got a great. This is a tax show, right? This is a tax show. So we're going straight into Did You Know. So this is the exclusive. Okay. So this bit here, you know, as I've said, I've made a recording of this with my picker hat on, but I almost lost my Wheaties when I was listening to this because I couldn't quite comprehend exactly what he was trying to say, because the data was just, first of all, where is that data coming from? And this is where the exclusive bit comes in. So let's take a listen.
We considered all those options when we developed the policy 3 years ago, Michael, but people say negative gearing is necessary to stimulate new construction. Well, at the moment, to the degree that that's true, 96% of negative gearing goes on existing houses, not new construction, so it's a 96% failure rate. If you allow negative gearing going forward, we grandfather all existing investments, but we allow it going forward for new construction. That means instead of 96% going to existing houses, 100% will go to new construction. It'll spur investment.
Hold the phones.
So you didn't catch the show, did you? I'm assuming.
I didn't. I've heard that for the first time, but 96% is ridiculous.
It's wrong.
Yeah.
It's just wrong. So that just led me on a mission to try and work out throughout the course of the first couple of days, digesting that, rang a few people, what's your read on the numbers and where do those numbers come from? And so it appears that the numbers are being quoted from the ABS data that shows the new financing. All right. Now, when it shows new financing, you can break down by investor, and you can break down by construction in investor and by existing. All right. So I'm thinking this data's wrong, and we obviously operate a mortgage broking business, and 60% of all new loans are generated through brokers, and I know the platforms that both the banks and the brokers use. And I know where that data comes from in terms of the actual first source of that data. So then I went exploring. I said, so how it works is the brokers and the lenders who are putting the applications together in the banks or direct put in a categorisation inside these platforms, you know, and that is then reported into APRA, and then APRA reports that into the ABS. And this is the exclusive.
Oh.
This is the exclusive. That data gets cleansed into existing when it's not, when it's absolutely off the plan or newly erected property. So the broker's putting in off the plan or they're putting in newly erected. And that data is being recorded under the existing property category. So when Mr. Bowen and the Labor Party are saying that it's a 96% failure rate, because all they're seeing in that data is the 4% of construction. And the construction loans are literally the frames and the roof and the actual dwelling that goes on, the improvements on the land. So this is just a game changer.
So for clarity, walk us through that. So the broker is putting the correct classification, but it's getting cleansed through to the ABS with the incorrect classification.
Correct. So there's more work to be done here in terms of trying to improve the data insights, because if Labor is thinking that negative gearing's not working because only 4% of people buy the new stock, it's just not possible. I mean, over the last couple of years, the construction of high density apartments, you know, Blind Freddie can see that a lot of that's sold to investors, right? A huge amount of that, and a huge amount of investors buy house and land packages. So that is not showing up in the data. So I feel for the Labor Party if they're thinking the reason that they needed to create the policy this way was based on the data that they were getting, which is just incorrect data. So, you know, in my belief, I think that it's probably 60-40 and maybe even 30-70, where I'm saying that 60 to 70% is actually new stock that's being bought and negatively geared, and 30% to 40% is existing dwellings. Okay, because also you've got to remember, a lot of people who buy existing dwellings buy cash flow neutral or cash flow positive properties, and it's very hard to get those types of properties brand new. So for Labor to think this is one problem. For Labor to then be sending that message out to everyone that the policy is not working is actually misleading.
So Ben, the key number there was 96%, and that sort of led for the last 7 days being a bit of a whirlwind for you. So talk us through. So you were obviously really passionate at the time of saying that last week when we broke it exclusively here on the Property Couch. But since then, so much more has developed. So talk us through
the backstory
later on that day, and then the calls and everything that you're making.
So after investigating those numbers, I wanted to validate that. So you just heard there that I thought it was between 60 and 70% could have been new, and the rest existing. Now, I think I'm wrong, right? You know, in terms of ringing around, I think it's more like 50-50 is what we're trying to get to. But it's not necessarily easy data to get. So I firstly rang Brad Beer from BMT, Tax Depreciations, who do a great job, and they have a significant market share.
Well, that's important, isn't it? Because he's got a cross-section of existing and brand new, and sits in a position of line of sight that not a lot of people get.
Yeah, so his data was suggesting it was around sort of 31-32% for the last 12 months. Now, for new, okay, and then the rest existing. Now, but he did qualify that. He says, I actually think it's higher than that, because his business doesn't get the big high rises, the big multiplex buildings.
Because they can get that done in-house, right? They've got someone who comes and does it in bulk for them,
That's right. So they get that done in-house. So I needed to get some further data. So I then have contacted AFG, okay? So that's who we aggregate through. And they are an excellent cross-section of the marketplace. You know, they have over 2,900 brokers across the country, and they're the biggest aggregator in the country, right? So I spoke to Mark Hewitt at AFG, and I said, Mark, is there any way we can get the numbers in terms of this? And they have a fantastic operating system and, a very good data set. So we were able to get Mark to run off and get some of those numbers. Now, while this is all happening in terms of me doing this research, it's becoming very clear that it's definitely not that 4%, right? And historically, Labor has been quoting more like 7% when they went to the market in 2016. Now, this is not new information to us, Bryce, as you know. On this podcast, we've been going since 2014. We said up until the 2016 election that their data's wrong, and the numbers they are quoting are wrong. And it wasn't until I saw exactly the extremities of what they were trying to claim as being completely, dangerous in terms of the forward estimates of what they were claiming. So I ring the Financial Review and I speak to Duncan Hughes there at the Financial Review. This is going back last week, so as I'm travelling to Canberra, I'm having conversation with Duncan, just basically saying, look, here's the story. It's significant, and every journalist, when they get approached by someone like me, has got to validate that information, right? So what then happens is Duncan Hughes rings around and speaks to Tim Reardon from the Housing Industry Association, speaks to Bradley Beer, and we still haven't, by this stage, we haven't got the data from AFG. They're going off and getting that data. So he then gets enough information to confirm, especially from the data dive that Tim did into the ABS data, that factually this doesn't make sense. In other words, the ABS data doesn't disseminate investor from existing, and and it doesn't also then disseminate what is new and existing for investor. It does it attempts to do it for owner occupiers, but as the video that I shot to illustrate this demonstrates, and we'll put the link.
I was going to say, for the benefit of those,
of those who haven't seen it yet, it is very clear that the collection of the data through the platforms that brokers use, and remember, brokers write 60% of all new loans, so another significant sample size to say that when we get this story out, it's got to be supported by qualitative data. Okay?
Which in that video you actually show the process. So if anyone wants to go and check it out, they can actually see under the bonnet on what that filtering looks like for it to be synthesised up to
correct. And we verbalised it exclusively on the podcast last week, but this really brings it home because it all sits under existing property, right? So you've got off the plan and you've got newly erected dwellings. And this is just a shout out to the data collectors and the ABS. This can be cleaned up a lot. It's still quite confusing. So brokers still might misallocate because they just can't find the right classification. So I think there is some work to be done there. And the better the data, we've always talked about the quality of the data in, the quality of the data out. So Duncan writes the first story, which leads as negative gearing assumptions based on dodgy data, right? And then the story gets some further legs in terms of, well, if that's the case on dodgy data, what does it mean for revenue? And so we then start having a chat with Matthew Cranston, and Matthew is obviously one of their chief economic reporters there, and I explain the story to him when I arrive back into Melbourne, and I'm talking to him and he's going, this is huge. Right? This is a valid story and it's absolutely in the public interest. So he goes off and starts to do his ringing around in terms of the economists and economic modelling, and he speaks to Danielle Wood from the Grattan Institute, because Danielle Wood, Sol Lestlake, and all of these people who have been on, I suppose you'd probably argue pro the negative gearing changes. We wanted to see how do they come to their conclusions and the quotes that they make. So Matt rings up Danielle, and she says, well, we've had to make a rough assumption. And that rough assumption was that inside that data in the ABS, you can see the owner-occupiers buying 14% new. So they just use that. Which, if you think about the market split, 70% owner-occupier,
it's not apples for
30% investor, it's just not going to wash the same way, right? The psychology of the investment buyer versus the owner-occupier buyer, in a lot of cases, is different, right? So
have a look around your suburb. How many people are buying an established property versus a new property?
That's right. So then what we see happen is, being challenged by this information, they also then start to go, hang about, maybe our data's wrong. And so they also go back to the Labor Party and say, hey, we think your data's wrong, now that they've realised that their data may be incorrect as well. So it blows up even further. And to Matt's credit and the Financial Review's credit, both Matt and Duncan have done terrific work on this particular story. They go and do the modelling dive in terms of what are the consequences in regards to the revenue that this policy is going to deliver. And that's when we saw, stories of about $8 billion off the estimates that Labor are promoting. So it is an incredibly big story, but it doesn't finish there. So what I want to do now is play a clip from yesterday's National Press Club where Chris Bowen is speaking, and he has some reporters asking him some interesting questions around, because this was a very big story yesterday.
Yep. You can tell by the Treasurer's body language too, because we sat around, you almost choked on your cornflakes last Sunday. You almost choked on your sweet and sour pork yesterday when you had
fried rice.
Your fried rice.
So when we were watching it over lunch. But look, the point here is, and again, we're using Chris's commentary because we don't want to put words into his mouth. So the way in which we're able to do this, because we have digital, and again, acknowledgements to the National Press Club and also the ABC for allowing this information. So we're not tainting his words. We're not quoting him. He's saying what he's saying. So let's cut to a question from the Australian, and let's hear the response from the Chris Bowen.
Greg Brown from the Australian. I've got the question you've been waiting for. You've just released figures as we were sitting down, actually, that from the PBO that they've assumed that in the first year of your negative gearing policy, 22% of the negative geared properties will be in new dwellings. What are the assumptions that the PBO has come up with for the current levels under the current policy of investors buying new dwellings compared to existing ones? Is it the 7% figure you've been quoting for 3 years? And on that 7% figure, did that come from the PBO, or did you just, because the ABS has obviously walked away from it, was it just a misread of the stats from out of your office?
No, not at all. Greg, there's two issues here. There's the policy rationale for the negative gearing reforms that we're proposing and the arguments we put forward to support it. And then quite separately, there's the costing. And with great respect to the Financial Review, that is what they got wrong this morning, rather spectacularly. They confused those two issues. Now, on the policy rationale, this is the point I've made consistently. There are those who argue that we need negative gearing to stimulate new construction, that people won't build new houses unless you have negative gearing. And I've, as you say, correctly pointed to the evidence that more than 90% of negative gearing goes to existing houses, existing properties. Sol Estlake made that point in his submission to the 2016 inquiry on home ownership. He said 92% of all borrowing by residential property investors over this past decade has been for the purchase of established dwellings. The Grattan Institute has used that figure very regularly, including as late as February. So that's it's a commonly accepted figure. And I've referred to it. Now, I saw this morning in your story that the Grattan Institute is now saying they've reviewed it and it's 86%. Okay, if that's their revised figure, it's 86%. So I've pointed out that if you think that your policy objective of negative gearing is to get new construction, it's got a 93% failure rate or it's got an 86% failure rate. Either are unacceptable to me. We wouldn't accept that sort of failure rate with many other policies. So that's the policy rationale. Then there's the costing, which is quite separate. Now, the problem that the Financial Review had this morning is they assumed, it's not Phil's fault, they had assumed that the figures that have been referred to by Grattan and me and Sol Estlake were the figures that the Parliamentary Budget Office had assumed, and they're wrong. They're wrong about that. The Parliamentary Budget Office costs Labor's policies, not me. And they make all sorts of assumptions based on the best evidence available to them, not just ABS figures. They have access to unpublished data by the Reserve Bank. They talk to the big four banks. They collect their data from a whole range of circumstances, and they reach a prudent assumption, a considered assumption, which they say is then their best estimate on a prudent basis. So some could argue that they take a small c conservative approach to make sure their costing is right. Now, when they first modelled our policy, they assumed 12% new dwelling under our policy, under the existing policy, and when they last updated it, and we asked them to update all our costings after every budget and MAEFO, very standard procedure, they lifted that to 22%. Something that wasn't known to the Fin when they said our costings were wrong this morning. Now, I just make this point. We have the most rigorous costings process of any opposition ever. We have the Parliamentary Budget Office, which in fairness to previous oppositions wasn't available, didn't exist, been available to us. A fine institution. And when I get angry when I see reports like that, I get angry on behalf of the Parliamentary Budget Office. Fine economists, qualified modellers, and they do their job well. And then we have over and above that, for extra rigour, the panel of three eminent Australians, Professor Bob Officer, Dr Michael Keating, a former Secretary of the Department of Finance, and James McKenzie, who satisfy themselves that the methodology is correct. Now that's more rigorous than, with respect, asking a mortgage broker, as the Finn's done this morning, how many of your loans go to new properties? And he says, oh, around half. Right? Our process is more rigorous than that. The PBO stands by their costings and I stand by the PBO.
So Ben, you're that mortgage broker he's just quoted.
Yeah, I'm that mortgage broker. And so
so just for clarity, right? So those page 6 of the Fin Review yesterday, industry including mortgage brokers such as Ben Kingsley of Empower Wealth.
Yeah,
he was referring to you.
So he's referring to me.
Mm-hmm.
Little does he know that I've got a little bit more experience than just a mortgage broker. Obviously, I've been, one of the sort of commentators on the property market for a long time. But yes, we have a mortgage broking business, and we do know that. So, and remember, I'm off getting this data from AFG, right? So, front page story from Matthew Cranston hits. This builds up, and also you saw there that Greg Brown from the Australian, and so people say, because it's important, right? It doesn't matter about the methodology if the data's wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the story here, and I think there's a couple of things he talks about. Firstly, the policy rationale, right? And he's arguing the policy rationale is if it's got a failure rate. Originally, he said on the Insiders program a failure rate of 96. That was 4%, right? Which was the latest data that he saw from the ABS. Wrong.
Yeah.
Then he goes to the long term. So even Greg Brown talks about that being 7%. Wrong. Then they go to Grattan Institute, which was quoting around 12 to 14%. That sort of moved around during the day. Wrong.
Now adjusted to 22.
Yes, but here's the deal, right? So just explaining it to the general public, the Parliamentary Budgeting Office, right? So they do these costings. So they are definitely independent of Labor, okay? And as Chris Bowen-Rotley points out, these are very smart academics.
Yeah.
We have no problems with, but we said back in 2016, their data's wrong. What was interesting for me was a couple of things there. No consultation with industry practitioners, referred to
Big banks,
Reserve Bank of Australia,
Bank,
Big Bank, ABS data, and some other data. Just no clarity on the data, right? So Matt puts the story out, and it goes, right? And at that stage there, I'd spoken to Mark Hewitt. He'd provided me with the data that I needed to see. So we looked at the analysis, and the analysis was clear. 43%, right? 43% of all investment lending was going to new. 43%, right? Not, the margins of 93 to 86 or whatever it is. So I would say it is a failure rate, but not at that. Now, I'm my view is it's around 50-50. And as I said, I was wrong. I thought it could have been as high as 60 or 70% given the building boom we've just had. But I'll happily say, even if it's around 45 to 50%, I'll go on record now and say, that's where I think the number's going to land. Now, there is more data being assessed in this space, and if that data's made available, we will share it, okay, in terms of what that looks like. But so the ramifications of that is we go to what he says there's two arguments here. One is the policy rationale, right? Now, what he's saying here is it's not adding to supply. Well, if you're right, at 96 or even at 86, he's probably got an argument. But that data's wrong. It's more like 45 to 50% is going to new. And at basically 1 in 2, that is absolutely adding to supply. I mean, we absolutely, we know that these high-rise apartments and medium-density apartments are often bought by investors.
Yeah.
And this is our industry expertise, our subject matter expertise that knows this stuff. And that's why I wanted to make an investigation into that. Now, this is where it gets quite interesting, Bryce, because then we look at the costings, right? And again, I think it's wise of Chris to be supporting the people based on their modelling. But they would first admit if their data in is wrong, their models are completely unreliable.
Yeah, junk in, junk out.
Yep, junk in, junk out. So when I saw the latest release from Labor, which Matt had updated his story, claiming that in the first year, their policy assumptions and their modelling says it rises to 22%. So it rises, so the number of people buying new will rise from its current base, which they don't say what it is, but one's got to assume now it's probably 93%, or 7%, rises from that 7% up to 22%. Now, that's not a rise if it's sitting at 45 to 50%. That's actually a fall in supply.
Well, it's 3 times as much as they thought and 50% less than it is.
Yeah, that's right. It's half of what it potentially is. So if that is the case, not only does this not stimulate, so you come back to the policy rationale, stimulate supply, it definitely won't stimulate supply if it's half of what it currently exists at. So that's problematic, but it gets even worse. If you think about what happens in the modelling, what it's basically saying is if that rises to 22, that's assuming that there is 78% of investors will still buy existing. And when they buy existing, that means that the negative gearing benefits of those people won't exist. And that's an automatic tax saving to the government, right? So straight away, if that is 43 or 45 or 50%, those tax savings are half of what they're projecting. If you understand that logic. At 22%, that's basically saying 78% of people are going to still buy these existing properties and negatively geared. So it doesn't assume change in buyer behaviour, number one. And if that locks in, those people who are going to buy can't claim the negative gearing. So they can't offset the losses against their income. And so the government gets that income from them on the existing property. But it's already at 43 or 45 or 50%.
Yeah.
So,
and it's a challenge too. When you have no secondary market, you then have the policy believing that's going to stimulate more supply. But the people who are actually going to provide that supply will be getting nervous too, Ben, because they'd be thinking, okay, sure, we've got this. In one hand, we're getting this free kick that says, let's go towards the stock that we're buying. And on the other hand, they'd be particularly nervous because they're going into extreme levels of debt just to finance these developments. And if they've got no buyout at the other end because there is no buyer for the stock because they will be stuck with something that they have no second. It'll have flow-on effects for everyone. And his policy rationale based on the wrong, because he was very strong about it being policy rationale and costings. Well, policy rationale you've just debunked, right? Yeah. And then the second bit that he was firm on was the costing. Well, if the rationale's been debunked, by nature the costing gets debunked.
Yeah, and the failure rate is not 86%. We're back to 50-50, and there's no failure rate at 50-50, right? That does introduce that supply. So one could explore that sort of modelling even further to say, what if it doesn't give a spike in new construction? Well, where does the PAYG revenue go for those people who are on the construction sites and all of that revenue? Is there a net offset? And when does the policy become mute from a revenue point of view? Because I would be arguing that it's going to be very close to a mute benefit. So why would you introduce a policy that introduces the dangers of a two-tier marketplace, a new and a second-hand marketplace, where again 30% of the buyer demand is investor? If they're not going to invest, the secondary market is also exposed to greater falls. So this has the potential, and we've said this all along, has the potential to crash the property market.
So you had a slogan you were talking around the office here yesterday about the upcoming election. You want to share that?
Well, I think it could turn into, Bryce, a referendum on house prices, right? For those people who do own homes, and I'm that's a bold statement, right? And I don't want to sensationalise it, but the reality is if I'm getting $1,080 in tax refunds with the new tax plan, I'm sort of thinking more along the lines of, I don't necessarily want to see my property prices drop significantly. And we just saw yesterday Moody's released their new forecasts. And those forecasts have shown across the country that there are going to be greater falls. And they also put in that would be further exacerbated by Labor's policy if introduced. So I'm now saying logic has got to prevail here. And I think, the great work that the Parliamentary Budgeting Office does, they've got to redo their numbers. And they need to redo their numbers based on, let's be conservative, like Chris asked, let's do it at 45%, right? Let's do it at 45% and let's see what the numbers spit out. And the same thing for Treasury. If Treasury are using numbers that are saying that it'll have a modest effect on property prices, these numbers are wrong. The data that you've got is materially incorrect, not just by a couple of percentage points, but we are talking by significant percentage points. So we've moved from him on the inside as being at 4% to now potentially being at 40 to 45%. Just significantly different. So if we see, if they're true to their word and they want to get the truth out to the marketplace, we've got time. There's enough time before the election for those numbers to be remodelled from both the PBO and also from Treasury with this new data, okay? Because we have strong evidence now, which is very much finite evidence around investor funding into new property, okay, which includes off the plan, which includes house and land packages, which includes construction. Okay, now we've got that data, we can now remodel and let's see in terms of that, because it obviously puts at question, under the Labor policy, we're talking about having, a lot more tax being collected, but bigger surpluses because we're collecting more tax. Well, this is 35 billion in the forward estimates that they're talking about. I'm not so sure those numbers are going to stack up.
So how do you see this playing out now? So clearly you were on Ross Greenwood's podcast last night.
Yep.
You're obviously talking to a bit more media today.
Yep.
I noticed that a lot of outlets are running with the story. I think it's gathering a bit of momentum. What do you hope and foresee that sort of maybe the next 48, 72 hours look like with this information coming out there?
Well, I just think, it's very much in the public interest. It goes to the heart of one of Labor's core policies, and that policy is now looking shaky. So I think what I'd be calling for is bring in the subject matter experts. So bring in the Tim Reardons, bring in the Masters Builders Association, bring in the Property Council, bring in the Property Investment Professionals of Australia, bring in CoreLogic's, Cameron Cusher or Tim Lawless, and let them talk to the Parliamentary Budget Office economists and think tank people, and let them bounce off what they think is going to happen in the market to get a more reliable model. That makes sense to me. The fact that industry hasn't been consulted with this policy back in 2016 and still remains on the outside of this conversation doesn't make sense. I mean, and I use the analogy for climate change. You wouldn't not talk to scientists, would you? I mean, there's some politicians who don't or refute the claims, but if 96% of them are telling you that climate change is real, and they're the subject matter experts, you'd listen to them. So I would have thought you'd be listening to these subject matter experts and you get all of that brain power together and you would come up with correct modelling based on this new data.
Because their fear would be that there'd be an agenda, commercial agenda. So for the record, you've talked about, and we've talked about the fact that there is opportunity to overhaul negative gearing, and also the system rewards someone on their 27th property as much as it rewards someone on their first property. So there is opportunities to scale that back, and you've also talked about in our private discussions and probably a couple on the podcast where capital gains tax concessions can be left in to reward people staying in as investors rather than speculators. So you've got some views that you'd like to share. So we run a business that is around property investing. So clearly there's an agenda, right? But you're also, talking to a group of people who are homeowners and who don't want potentially want the value of their home to drop as well as investing. So yes, there is some self-interest here as well, but it's not blind self-interest, because there is an alternative view that you and Peter Kaluzos, that is Margaret, were all prepared to put that forward and say, here's an alternative that might work. So keep going down the path you're doing, but let's tweak the edges so it actually looks like this rather than a blind view of that.
Yeah, Bryce, I am completely biased, right? I'm completely biased in the property owner's favour. So investors don't sit isolated to property owners, Bryce. I mean, on the street corner of every street, you don't have a flag out the front saying I'm an investment property, right? You know, every house is interlinked to each other for its intrinsic and ultimate market value, right? So it's you've got to understand that. So I'm advocating on behalf of all property owners, not just investors here, because we've said it all along. This is definitely bad for demand, which ultimately will affect property prices. And then there's the flow-on effect to consumption in the economy. So it's not good policy. I've called it a shocker from day one when I first saw it. But on the other side of that, you would think that Masters Builders Associations and the Housing Industry Association would actually be rubbing their hands together in the view that this is going to boost new construction. They've actually said it's not. They understand that the secondary market is critical to continuing to build supply. So
yeah, I've talked to project marketers, Ben. They said that you'd think the one-off bounty for them. They said, no, we don't want that. There's no secondary market. No. We'd have a very short-term business. They want a healthy property market overall. It's interesting later on in that interview, one of the reporters asked, what keeps you up at night? And he was quite frank and open about that, external shocks. But what's interesting is something might be hiding in plain sight here that it should be keeping him up at night. Really understanding what impact this is going to have, because it seems a little bit flippant in the remarks that I've seen, and you've seen it more than me.
GDP is made up of 60% of domestic consumption, right? So I agree, the world shocks might be a trigger, okay, and as one potentially our future treasurer has rightly pointed out, that's something he's got to keep in the back of his mind. But you're right, what's in plain sight now is the Masters Builders Association saying things like, this will cost over 30,000 jobs. Now you would have thought they'd be sitting going, woohoo, new builds, everyone's going to buy new builds. They understand. So I think, the best part about this is common heads will prevail, and I'm sure, not only through the PBO, but also through Treasury and also through those people that also check the methodology that he was referring to, they would all say, we've got to look at these numbers again. They just don't seem to work. And I'm looking forward to that being announced, that the numbers are going to be reviewed, and hopefully we'll have enough time for them. But if they don't bring in the industry people, then I'll be a little bit speculative, and suspect of their data and what the outcomes were. I think there is definitely, and all of us will get on a plane and we'll all come and share our data, and we'll all sort of sit down and have that right think tank. Once we have that, then the methodology will be right because the data will be right, and then we'll ultimately see whether this policy has benefits for the economy, more broadly speaking, or the subsequent fallout of the other revenues that they were going to raise through higher employment and so forth. You've got to wonder whether this policy is going to live.
All right, mate. Well, I've got to say, well done first, and I mean that with humility, because someone had to be the person that flew the flag, right? So I know I've spent many years with you. I know that you're humbly walking around, so there's certainly no ego in this. But well done on you for. We laughed last week, you choked on your cornflakes, but a lot of people could choke on the cornflakes and just got on with it. So you made phone calls, you were prepared to get out there, you've been running around on the circuit. So well done on that on behalf of all property owners. Hopefully it's received as it's intended, which is just essentially what you're saying is, hey, listen, we're at the coalface, come and listen to us, and let's craft something together. Labor Party, if you get in, let's craft something together that's in the best interest of everyone, not just something that hasn't been crafted well. So, mate, I know you've been just chasing this. Mate, I made a little sideways remark that John Grisham needed to be around because you've chased it with the research rigour of something that he's put together. So, well done.
Thank you.
And on behalf of everyone who this is affected, and that's someone who's got a roof over their head, we applaud you for that. If you've got any views on this, folks, again, we're talking only about the policy. So if you've got any views, we'll put a little link up on Facebook, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. Any feedback that you've got, and also just give some feedback if you've got any sort of 1%ers that you might think help Ben over the next sort of weeks as this sort of plays out. So well done. We'd love to hear from you. All right, today my life hack is, Ben. Last week I talked about a life hack where it was to get off the social media slot machines.
Yes.
What I do know is that a basic human behaviour principle is You actually need to swap, not stop. So it's like saying, Ben, stop smoking. You don't smoke, but Ben, stop smoking. And you go, sure. But then all of a sudden you're at a party and you need to do something with your fingers, and all of a sudden it's not easy to stop.
It's routine.
So you've got to swap it with something, right?
Yep.
So today I am going to say, well, social media gives you a dopamine hit, and it's something that we're addicted to, and it gives us something. So for sure, I wonder how many people, I've had a few people ping me and say, yep, that was a good idea. We put all the, but then all of a sudden when the moment comes that they have to, get the fidgets, and they've got what would they do in terms of swapping it, Ben? So I've got some solutions here. I would suggest that you organise your home screen, Iris, for deep learning over shallow learning. All right. So what does that mean? Shallow learning is clearly thumbing through feeds on social media. Deep learning, a couple of things. On my home screen, I have Blinkist, which is book summaries.
Yes.
Clearly, I have my podcast app on that. I have the Audible app because I'm a big audiobook listener.
Yep.
I've got iBooks. So whenever I get a PDF, Ben, that I don't have time to read, I know that at some point I'm going to be in a train or in a plane or in an Uber, and I've just got to kill some time.
Yep.
So that PDF, I don't know if you know, you can actually save it. I'm talking about iPhone user, Iris.
Yep.
You can save it to iBooks, right? So you go into iBooks and you got your books and you got your PDFs. So you can go flick through the PDFs. So that's another option. And for me, I use an app called MindNode. I get nothing from it, Ben. There's plenty, but it's a mind mapping software, and my mind works like a mind map all the time. So I mind map everything. I mind map books. I mind map things that are going on in my world. So I can just get that. So therefore, I can actually swap rather than stop from those social media. So
can I add a little bonus to that?
Yes.
So when you've got your PDF and you may not be able to read it because your eyes, and you don't have your glasses like me, you can highlight it, copy all, and hit voice, and it'll read it to you. So it'll read your PDF to you. So you can still listen. So it'll just automatically read it to you.
So you copy it and paste it to where?
Well, you still paste it into your iBooks, right? But once you open the PDF, you know how you just put your finger on it, and you can sort of save all, or you can what do they select all? Yeah, you select all, and then you just hit voice. And it'll play it, and so it'll just read it out to you.
I'm going to go.
So there you go.
A little sneaky on that one.
That's what I get.
So the last bit on that, folks, is the way, because productivity is really important to me, as it is the whole heap of our listeners. So what I've done is on the home screen dock, you've got 4 icons that just remain there.
Yep.
I've changed them from the default, because the default has the phone and the SMS messenger on it.
Yep.
I've moved those off.
Okay.
Because think about it, you're not using those all the time, but what I do use all the time is I use Nosby. I've said that before, which is my to-do list.
Yep.
I've got Evernote in there.
Yep.
I've got Mail, and then I've got a habit list as well. So
cool.
There you go, folks. My life hack today is swap, don't stop. So organise your home screen for deep learning over shallow learning.
And Bryce, I've done a lot of the talking today, so I'm going to give you the opportunity to talk about Did You Know?
I thought this was really amusing this morning because I was talking to you about this, and you go, mate, there's an opportunity for you, and I just smirked Iris because I thought, he's been busy this week, he just didn't have time to prepare his Did You Know. So lucky that I did, and and I did prepare. Did you know, Ben, that although many countries today are democracies, most of the Western cultures developed from aristocracies?
Correct.
So in such systems, those of noble birth, i.e. the landed gentry, Ben, held almost all of the productive assets in society.
They did.
Now, in centuries past, these assets were mostly land-based.
Yep.
Okay?
Yep.
So the landed gentry, or the lords, Iris, were relatively few, and the majority of the population was composed of workers. And back then they were called serfs, and not the kind that you would find at the beach, Ben. It was SERFS.
Okay, got it.
So you had the lords, who were the landed gentry, and then you had the workers, who were the serfs.
Yep.
So the serfs worked the lord's land while paying the lord rent to live on his land, Ben. So here's my big finale. Hence the term, Ivis, landlord.
So that's where we got the word landlord from.
So if you are a property investor and you are a landlord, that is how the term came about. You're a landlord from centuries past. We've had origins
I did not know
in
that,
aristocracies, even though we are now democracies.
Hey, and Bryce, of all your Did You Knows?
That was the most recent.
I know you too well.
There you go, Ben, on my debut for Did You Know?
I liked it, Bryce.
Actually, it wasn't my debut. I've done it once before.
You have. But I did say that I don't necessarily have one, but I do have some exciting news for all the people who are using the Money Smarts platform.
Oh.
You know how we released MoneyFit recently?
I did.
And you could have a look at how you compared against everyone else. Well, we've got some new charts. Logical, so you know how we've got the surplus chart. Now we have income and expenditure that have been added. So, and it's going to get more. We're going to get all these insights. So if you wanted to know just where you sit in terms of income, think about it. So you can sort your income, have a look at that, and then you can also have a look at how your expenditure sits in terms of how you're spending against other people.
Nice.
So you're starting, and then tell the full story, have a look at your surplus.
So, mate, that's awesome. So two of the 4 levers are right there.
So jump on board and check it out if you haven't already. People, if you want to know basically how your income compares, remember you can do by state and you can also do by household composition of single or couple.
It's terrific. I love it. It's just wonderful. My show is often, where people get to sit there with a glass of red, Ben. How does what I got compare to what you got?
Yes.
So MoneyFit allows you to do a little bit more of that.
Yeah, it does. It's just helpful, right?
Yep.
And if that inspires you to move up the income chain, or it inspires you to, our expenditure is a little bit high compared to others, we're going to get more and more of these insights. So it's exciting. That's the next instalment, just gone live today.
Oh, I like it, Ben. And one thing I didn't say last week, Ben, is for those of our couchers who are enjoying Escape from the City, I was on last week, Ben.
You were?
In the I didn't tell everyone, the very fresh orange. It was very cool. If you want to go to ABC iView and watch last week's, you can actually see I was wearing a jacket and a shirt. And I remember turning up because I was a naive Perth boy, Ben, from Melbourne. You think I'd be familiar with cold? And they just looked at me and they went, so you're planning to wear that? And I went, yeah, of course I am. They go, it is freezing here.
Now, and I don't want
to go buy some thermal undies.
I watched it, Ross. I know, shock horror, but I did actually watch it. And
the full episode?
Yep, and wasn't it interesting which property they ended up choosing?
Well, you can't, Ben.
I don't want to give away, I don't want to,
But someone did do a purchase. There's probably a little spoiler alert, which is good. But go and check that out. But I remember on that I had to go into I think it was Kmart or Target in Orange, and I'm looking around for thermal undies. And one of our podcasters comes up to me, Bryce, what are you doing in Orange? And I went, well, the short story, the long story here. And then he goes, oh, so I've got that, and starts just going, like, I had this question like it was Q&A day, right? And I'm thinking, I've got someone staying outside, I've got to do this as fast as I can. So I said, thanks for listening, we got to go. Anyway, man, you just got Q&A day here in the studio, got Q&A day
Have you ever seen us come up and ask this question? If we've got time, we will definitely answer it. If we've got a team of producers and film crew and everyone waiting outside, we might
waiting on me to pick up my thermal undies. It's time to go, so very good. Well done.
Good. All right, so remember everyone, knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it.
Very well said. See you next week too. Hey there folks, Bryce Holdaway here. Before you go, if you're new to our community and only listened to maybe a handful of episodes, I thoroughly recommend that you go all the way back to episode number 1, where we unpack all of the foundations when it comes to property investing. Now for those of you that might be a little bit time poor, I've got good news for you. We have a binge guide that you can download straight away, which summarises the first 20 episodes where Ben and I unpack the foundational pillars of the A, B, C, D and so much more. And you can get that straight away. If you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20, you can download it and consume it whenever you want. It's completely free and available now. And for those of you, just a quick reminder that nothing we've spoken about today constitutes financial advice. We recommend that you reach out to your licensed professional advisor so that you can look at your unique circumstances before acting on any information. Now don't forget, go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20 and get your binge guide today.